get your frustration and the challenge there, but I really think this is as Aaron mentioned, a very powerful tool. If we can get to that point, it can be a very useful tool in implementing some of the tiny, small changes in the short term, and then the big ones in the long term.
Yeah, I think you want a master plan for a few reasons. One is to preserve things. You want to go on record for the things you want to preserve, whether it's a character of the neighborhood or the uses, single family here, the way the open space works, or the way the streets are working. If there's anything about your neighborhood that you feel like is fundamental to the health of the neighborhood and the quality of life, you want a plan to go on record saying these things should not change.
Just don't say golf course.
Yeah.
Please don't say golf course.
I want to throw something else in. What about, because we have a large section of Freedom Park, how does that, because we probably have one of the largest areas that Freedom Park encompasses in Candler Park, from Moreland all the way down to Terrace. So how does that, play into a master plan? Because basically that's a whole different.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. In a master plan, you end up focusing you drill down real heavy on key topics or key locations. So in Edgewood, for example, we really focused on the multifamily housing in the middle of the neighborhood. We focused on the MARTA site. We focused on one of their parks. We focused on another multifamily development that's on the edge of the neighborhood. And then there's other parts of the neighborhood where you might make basic recommendations to preserve a character, but you don't drill down as specifically. What happens in every neighborhood is you have your areas that are either there's a problem there, or there's an area you're really afraid something's going to happen there that you don't want. You will find as a community what your focus areas are. If a park or that area, if you're just kind of fine with the way it is and there's no problem there, then a master plan can just kind of document that and note that. The master plan doesn't have to look at every square inch of your neighborhood and have some radical new idea for it. So you will know that, though. The neighborhood will and that works that way in every community, that you start the process and you just start hearing what the problems are. You ask people, hey, what are some of your concerns? What are your issues? What are some of the things you'd like to see solved? And that ends up starting to set the direction and tell you, hey, really focus on this side here, not so much over there, but here's where the areas are that we're concerned about. But if that was an area that there was a concern that, hey, we don't like the way it is now, or we think it could be way better, then a master planning process could be leveraged to envision what that could be.
Are there links to our neighbors' master plans from the city website, or do you?
They should be accessible through the planning department.
Yeah, the planning department has a list. I think it's current. It might be maybe a year out of date, but a list of all the plans in the city that they have adopted, that the city has adopted. So all of these master plans are on a list. There's probably about 50 or 60 of them. And you'll see North Highland, Virginia Highland, East Atlanta.
You said 50 or 60? Mm-hmm. And Candler Park is one of those?
Yeah.
50 or 60? Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And so getting it adopted by the city, the process for that is...
So what you want to do is you want your plan, if you do a master plan, you want it to be adopted into the comprehensive development plan of the city. So the city has this, it's kind of the Bible for the city. It's like the guiding document. It talks about the airport, vision and goals and funding priorities and transportation, environment, all these categories. Well, every master plan, well, not every master plan, but neighborhood master plans that are adopted and approved by the city council in the comprehensive development plan are really where you have teeth. That's where what you've already heard, that if a city wants to make funding decisions, that they go to the comprehensive development plan, or whatever's in that plan, including adopted neighborhood plans, that's really where they can direct. This is policy, this is the city policy in here. And if your neighborhood plan's in there, that means they can direct funding and staffing and energy towards that master plan.
But specifically, the neighborhood association would have to approve it. The MPU would then have to approve it. Then the city council would adopt it. We wouldn't touch it until the neighborhood has said, this is what we want.
Right.
So we wouldn't do it over the neighborhood's objection.
That's right.
The variance process.
I'm sorry?
The variance process has to go to the NPU and.
The master plan isn't really a variance necessarily, as it is just a design that comes up.
Right, but it's the same steps.
Same steps,
Right,
yeah.
right,
And,
yes,
it,
yes,
and the
exactly.
thing is, it doesn't have to do that, but you want it to do that.
Yeah.
There's no city requirement that every plan goes through this process, but knowing how this works, the council won't approve a plan that the MPU and the neighborhood don't want.
We won't touch it.
So, and for us, when you're doing a planning process, you are with the neighborhood and then MPU leadership. You're doing it together. So there's no surprises when we get to the end. And that's what, with Edgewood, unanimously approved by the Edgewood neighborhood, then it was unanimously approved at MPUO, and then it goes to council, and then it gets into the comprehensive development plan. But that only happens when you involve everybody through the process. And he's right, it can feel messy at times, especially at the very beginning of the master planning process. You're starting with all the junk. You're asking people what isn't working, what do you not like, what's broken, and you just hear all of that, and it can feel a little bit negative. But that's how you start, by knowing what the problems are, and then you start to fix them. And a planning expertise is to kind of know how to navigate that and to know how you fix those things. And it ends very hopeful, and it's this huge momentum boost. When people get done with a neighborhood gets done with a master plan, I mean, you just feel like, actually you have to caution everybody, because everyone feels like this is going to be awesome and you think it's going to happen. People think in like 3 months everything we just said is going to happen. And you have to tell people now, look, some things will happen in a year, some things will happen in 3 years, some things will be 5 years. You all have to stay on it and keep talking to the city and make sure they do these things. But it will be awesome, but it might take some time. Yeah.
2 things. First of all, 28 years ago this month, I moved into my house here, and I'm still there, okay? And during that time period, I've seen a lot of things come up and get discussed and then maybe go away. One of those was the discussion about historic preservation.
Yeah.
And then when people understood what that meant, and the things that they would not be able to do, like screen on their front porch if they wanted to, the subject changed, And I know that some of the areas around here, Inman Park, for example, do have that in place. But processes like that tend to drive up the diversity of this neighborhood and the various opinions that we have. Which I think might have been one of the things too that scared off Park Pride. It's sometimes difficult for us to come to consensus, because we do have this thing about everybody should be heard, everybody should be considered, but sometimes it's hard to get agreement, and buy-in to the point where there's a huge majority, It can be a little bit challenging in this neighborhood.
Right.
That's one of that's one of our strengths, and that's one of our weaknesses.
Yeah.
So whoever we bring on to negotiate this path with us has got to understand that and not throw up their hands in disgust or despair, from the process of working with us, okay? So that's one thing, and kind of right along those lines, the historic designation, would that be one of the things that we'd probably address in the process, or
You know,
could address?
Honestly, a master plan would typically take you up to the point of saying, this is something you all should look into. A master plan wouldn't write it, it wouldn't
Okay.
say you have to do it here and it has to look like that. That's way too detailed.
Okay.
And given that a master planning team really, you're working for somebody, right? So, and that doesn't mean that you don't have a brain, but it means that there is still a group of people who are driving the process.
Yeah.
And that's why I think these work well in the neighborhood is the funder, because
Right.
then it really is, we're leveraging your own existing
A little more
leadership
trust.
system
Yeah.
and how you already work.
Trust
It's not
in the
it's not a
process.
group of people who come in and are going to tell you what to do for 6 months.
Yeah.
We're an extension of you, and we're bringing expertise that you don't have. But it doesn't go where you don't want to go. Now your own leadership structure and how it works might be clunky and messy because of all that diversity. That's okay. That doesn't. I mean, when you do this, I mean, you're used to that. You know?
Well, I mean, as I said, it's a double-sided thing. It's our strength and
Yeah.
it can be our weakness.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And
Sometimes leading us to the point of taking no action.
yeah.
You know. The other part is, I know that there are some plans that exist for areas surrounding us. You've mentioned Edgewood, of course. Then there's the Moreland Avenue study and all that. And some of these areas, particularly the Moreland Avenue study, may have some things that some of us do not want to see implemented. Like I know that there's been talk for a long time of making it legal to make a left turn on Euclid going south on Moreland Avenue. I, for one, do not want to see that happen, you know.
Yeah.
Besides it creating a bottleneck, I also live on Euclid, and I don't want any more traffic going down there than is already going down there,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So when that happens and we decide we want X, and another plan that addresses that same area says Y, what happens there?
What'd you say?
I'm ready, I'm ready.
Well, I'll say another double-edged sword and a blessing and a curse of planning is that oftentimes the most current plan is what's what kind of plays out. So, for example, a plan that's been done, 5, 6, or even 10 years ago, it can just start to lose its weight. You kind of have to do these pretty frequently, and I know from doing a lot of these master plans. For example, when we did Edgewood, we looked at the Moreland study. Because when you do a plan, the first thing you do as a planner is look at what the other plans have been, if there are any. So we looked at that, and there were things that were in that plan that was done years before, that at this point in time in the neighborhood, they didn't like a few of those things.
Yeah.
Now, they weren't major things. Mostly it was land use related. We kind of want this density and not that density. But the city was involved in the process. They understand that happens. They were fine with that. And so that happens. That does happen.
So you can negotiate.
Yeah,
those
absolutely.
things.
Now, I don't know what would come out. There would certainly be a situation where, like for example, the Moreland DeKalb Ave interchange. For the city and the comprehensive transportation plan, that's a big deal. If let's say for some reason this neighborhood didn't like that and wanted to do away with it, that probably wouldn't happen. That's a big thing that all the transportation and public works folks are on board with and trying to get funding for. So, depending on what it would be, but, the minor things, the rest of them I think are kind of not minor to you all, but for the city, they're just more minor. If you wanted it to be a different kind of a, zoning district, or you wanted a bike lane here and not there, or, a turning lane kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think whatever's happening now, and when the city's at the table, we're listening, and whatever comes out of that is what becomes sort of the new.
Okay, thanks.
And I saw Joshua's hand up, but I wanted to say too, let me frame it a different way. If you don't have a plan, you have no defense.
Right,
So,
right. More evidence, thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, a big difference maybe in this, and obviously I haven't been in the neighborhood as long as you, is, if you're paying somebody, it's kind of we can sit around in a neighborhood meeting and kind of talk about, historic stuff and all that sort of stuff. But when we're at the beginning paying somebody to say,